There's rapture, or there should be in the motion crutches give. It's a series of little flights skimming the ground. You take off, you land, through the thronging, sound in wind and limb who have to fasten one foot to the ground before they dare lift up the other. And even their most joyous hastenings is less aerial than my hobble. But these are reasonings based on analysis. And though my mind was still taken up with my mother, and with a desire to know if I was near her, it was gradually less so. Perhaps because of the silver in my pockets, but I think not. And then, too, because these were ancient cares, and the mind cannot always brood on the same cares, but needs fresh cares from time to time, so as to revert with renewed vigour when the time comes to ancient cares. But can one speak here of fresh and ancient cares? I think not. But it'd be hard for me to prove it. What I can assert without fear is that I gradually lost interest in knowing, among other things, what town I was in, and if I should soon find my mother and settle the matter between us. And even the nature of that matter grew dim for me, without, however, vanishing completely, for it was no small matter, and I was bent on it. All my life, I think, I'd been bent on it. Yes, so far as I was capable of being bent on anything, all a lifetime long, and what a lifetime, I had been bent on settling this matter between my mother and me, but had never succeeded. And while saying to myself that time was running out and that soon it would be too late, was perhaps too late already to settle the matter in question, I felt myself drifting towards other cares, other phantoms. And far more than to know what town I was in, my haste was now to leave it, even were it the right one, where my mother had waited so long, and perhaps was waiting still. But you'd think that once well clear of the town, and having turned round to look at it, what there was to see of it, you'd think that then I should have realized whether it was really my town or not. But no, I looked at it in vain, and perhaps unquestioningly, and simply to give the gods a chance, by turning round. Perhaps I only made a show of looking at it. I didn't feel I missed me bicycle. No, not really. I didn't mind going on me way, the way I said, swinging low in the dark over the earth along the little empty country roads. And I said there was little likelihood of me being molested, and that it was more likely I should molest them if they saw me. Morning is the time to hide. They wake up, hale and hearty, their tongues hanging out for order, beauty and justice, baying for their due. Yes, from 8 to 9 till noon is the dangerous time. But towards noon things quiet down, the most implacable are sated, they go home. It might have been better, but they've done a good job. There've been a few survivors, but they'll give no more trouble. Each man counts his rats. It may begin again in the early afternoon, after the banquet, the celebrations, the congratulations, the orations. But it's nothing compared to the morning, mere fun. Coming up to 4 or 5, of course, there's the night shift, the watchmen beginning to bestir themselves. But already the day is over, the shadows lengthen, the walls multiply, you hug the walls, bowed down like a good boy, oozing with obsequiousness, having nothing to hide, hiding from mere terror, looking neither right nor left, hiding, but not provocatively, ready to come out, to smile, to listen, to crawl, nauseating but not pestilent, less rat than toad. Then the true night, perilous too, but sweet to him who knows it, who can open to it like the flower to the sun, who himself is night, day and night. No, there's not much to be said for the night either, but compared to the day there's much to be said for it, and notably compared to the morning there's everything to be said for it. For the night purge is in the hands of technicians for the most part. They do nothing else. The bulk of the population have no part in it, preferring their warm beds, all things considered. Day is the time for lynching, for sleep is sacred, and especially the morning between breakfast and lunch. My first care then, after a few miles in the desert dawn, was to look for a place to sleep, For sleep, too, is a kind of protection, strange as it may seem. For sleep, if it excites the lust to capture, seems to appease the lust to kill, there and then and bloodily. Any hunter will tell you that. For the monster on the move or on the watch, lurking in his lair, does no mercy, whereas he, taken unawares in his sleep, may sometimes get the benefit of milder feelings, which deflect the barrel, sheathe the kriss. For the hunter is weak at heart and sentimental, overflowing with repressed treasures of gentleness and compassion. And it's thanks to this sweet sleep of terror or exhaustion that many a foul beast and worthy of extermination can live on till he dies in the peace and quiet of our zoological gardens, broken only by the innocent laughter, the knowing laughter of children and their elders on Sundays and bank holidays. And I, for my part, have always preferred slavery to death. I mean, being put to death. For death is a condition I've never been able to conceive to my satisfaction, and which therefore cannot go down in the ledger of weal and woe, whereas my notions on being put to death inspired me with confidence, rightly or wrongly, and I felt I was entitled to act on them in certain emergencies. Oh, they weren't notions like yours, they were notions like mine. All spasm, sweat, and trembling, without an atom of common sense or lucidity. But they were the best I had. Yes, the confusion of my ideas on the subject of death was such that I sometimes wondered, believe me or not, if it wasn't a state of being even worse than life. So I found it natural not to rush into it, and when I forgot myself to the point of trying to stop in time. It's my only excuse. So I crawled into some hole somewhere, I suppose, and waited, half sleeping, half sighing, groaning and laughing, or feeding me body to see if anything had changed, for the morning frenzy to abate. Then I resumed my spirals. And as to saying what became of me and where I went in the months and perhaps the years that followed, no, for I weary of these inventions, and others beckon to me. But in order to blacken a few more pages, may I say I spent some time at the seaside, without incident. There are people the sea doesn't suit who prefer the mountains or the plain. Personally, I feel no worse there than anywhere else. Much of my life has ebbed away before this shivering expanse to the sound of the waves in storm and calm and the claws of the surf. Before, no, more than before, one with, spread on the sand or in a cave. In the sand I was in the element, letting it trickle between my fingers, scooping holes that I filled in a moment later, or that filled themselves in, flinging it in the air by handfuls, rolling in it. And in the cave, lit by the beacons at night, I knew what to do in order to be no worse off than elsewhere. And that my land went no further, in one direction at least, did not displease me. And to feel there was one direction at least in which I could go no further without first getting wet, then drown, was a blessing. For I've always said, first learn to walk, then you can take swimming lessons. But don't imagine my region ended at the coast. That'd be a grave mistake. For it was this sea, too, its reefs and distant islands and its hidden depths. And I, too, once went forth on it, in a sort of oarless skiff, but I paddled with an old bit of driftwood. And I sometimes wonder if I ever came back from that voyage. For if I see myself putting to sea, and the long hours without landfall, I do not see the return, the tossing on the breakers, and I do not hear the frail keel grating on the shore. I took advantage of being at the seaside to lay in a store of sucking stones. They were pebbles, but I called them stones. Yes, on this occasion I laid in a considerable store. I distributed them equally between my 4 pockets and sucked them turn and turn about. This raised a problem which I first solved in the following way. I had, say, 16 stones, 4 in each of my 4 pockets. these being the 2 pockets of me trousers and the 2 pockets of me greatcoat. Taking a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat and putting it in my mouth, I replaced it in the right pocket of my greatcoat by a stone from the right pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my trousers, which I replaced by a stone from the left pocket of my greatcoat, which I replaced by the stone which was in my mouth, as soon as I'd finished sucking it. Thus there were still 4 stones in each of me 4 pockets, but not quite the same stones. And when the desire to suck took hold of me again, I drew again on the right pocket of my greatcoat, certain of not taking the same stone as the last time. And while I sucked it, I rearranged the other stones in the way I've just described, and so on. But this solution did not satisfy me fully, for it did not escape me that by an extraordinary hazard, the 4 stones circulating thus might always be the same 4, in which case, far from sucking the 16 stones, turn and turn about, I was really only sucking 4, always the same turn and turn about. But I shuffled them well in my pockets before I began to suck, and again while I sucked before transferring them, in the hope of obtaining a more general circulation of the stones from pocket to pocket. But this was only a makeshift that could not long content a man like me, so I began to look for something else. And the first thing I hit upon was that I might do better to transfer the stones 4x4 instead of 1x1. That is to say, during the sucking, to take the 3 stones remaining in the right pocket of my greatcoat and replace them with the 4 in the right pocket of my trousers, and these were the 4 in the left pocket of my trousers, and these were the 4 in the left pocket of my greatcoat, and finally these were the 3 from the right pocket of my greatcoat, plus the 1 as soon as I'd finished sucking it, which was in my mouth. Yes, it seemed to me at first that by so doing I'd arrive at a better result. But on further reflection, I had to change my mind and confess that the circulation of the stones 4x4 came to exactly the same thing as their circulation 1x1, for if I was certain of finding each time in the right pocket of my greatcoat 4 stones totally different from their immediate predecessors, the possibility nevertheless remained of my always chancing on the same stone within each group of 4, and consequently of me sucking not the 16 turn and turn about as I wished, but in fact 4 only, always the same turn and turn about. So I had to seek elsewhere than in the mode of circulation. For no matter how I caused the stones to circulate, I always ran the same risk. It was obvious that by increasing the number of my pockets, I was bound to increase my chances of enjoying my stones in the way I planned, that's to say, one after the other until their number was exhausted. Had I had 8 pockets, for example, instead of the 4 I did have, then even the most diabolical hazard could not have prevented me from sucking at least 8 of my 16 stones, turn and turn about. The truth is, I should have needed 16 pockets in order to be quite easy in my mind, and for a long time I could see no other conclusion on this, that short of having 16 pockets, each with its stone, I could never reach the goal I set myself, short of an extraordinary hazard. And if at a pinch I could double the number of my pockets, were it only by dividing each pocket in 2, with the help of a few safety pins, let's say, to quadruple them seemed to be more than I could manage. And I did not feel inclined to take all that trouble for a half measure, for I was beginning to lose all sense of measure after all this wrestling and wrangling, and to say all or nothing. And if I was tempted for an instant to establish a more equitable proportion between my stones and my pockets, or reducing the former to the number of the latter, it was only for an instant, for it would have been an admission of defeat. And sitting on the shore, before the sea, the 16 stones spread out before me eyes, I gazed at them in anger and perplexity. For just as I had difficulty in sitting on a chair, or in an armchair, because of my stiff leg, you understand, so I had none in sitting on the ground, because of my stiff leg and my stiffening leg, for it was about this time that my good leg good in the sense that it was not stiff, began to stiffen. I needed a prop under the ham, you understand, and even under the whole length of the leg, the prop of the earth. And while I gazed thus at my stones, revolving interminable martingales, all equally defective, and crushing handfuls of sand, so that the sand ran through my fingers and fell back on the strand, yes, while thus I lulled me mind and part of me body, one day, suddenly, it dawned on the former, dimly, that I might perhaps achieve my purpose without increasing the number of my pockets or reducing the number of my stones, but simply by sacrificing the principle of trim. The meaning of this illumination, which suddenly began to sing within me like a verse of Isaiah or of Jeremiah, I did not penetrate at once, and notably the word trim, which I never met with in this sense, long remained obscure. Finally, I seemed to grasp that this word trim could not here mean anything else, anything better than the distribution of the 16 stones in 4 groups of 4, 1 group in each pocket, and that it was my refusal to consider any distribution other than this that had vitiated my calculations until then, and rendered the problem literally insoluble. And it was on the basis of this interpretation, whether right or wrong, that I finally reached a solution, inelegant assuredly, but sound. Now, I'm willing to believe, indeed I firmly believe, that other solutions to this problem might have been found, and indeed may still be found, no less sound, but much more elegant than the one I shall now describe, if I can. And I believe, too, that had I been a little more insistent, a little more resistant, I could have found them myself. But I was tired, and I contented myself ingloriously with the first solution that was a solution to this problem. But not to go over the heartbreaking stages through which I passed before I came to it. Here it is, in all its hideousness. All that was necessary was to put, for example, to begin with, 6 stones in the right pocket of my greatcoat or supply pocket, 5 in the right pocket of my trousers, and 5 in the left pocket of my trousers. That makes the lot. 2 × 5, 10 + 6, 16. And none remained in the left pocket of my greatcoat, which for the time being remained empty. Empty of stones, that is, for its usual contents remained, as well as occasional objects. For where do you think I hid me vegetable knife, me silver, me horn, and the other things that I've not yet named? Perhaps shall never name. Good. Now I can begin to suck. Watch me closely. I take a stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat, suck it, stop sucking it, put it in the left pocket of my greatcoat, the one empty of stones. I take a second stone from the right pocket of my greatcoat, suck it, put it in the left pocket of my greatcoat, and so on, until the right pocket of my greatcoat is empty, apart from its usual and casual contents, and the 6 stones I've just sucked, one after the other, are all in the left pocket of my greatcoat. Pausing, then, and concentrating, so as not to make a balls of it, I transfer to the right pocket of my greatcoat, in which there are no stones left, the 5 stones in the right pocket of my trousers, which I replace by the 5 stones in the left pocket of my trousers, which I replace by the 6 stones in the left pocket of my greatcoat. At this stage, then, the left pocket of my greatcoat is again empty of stones, while the right pocket of my greatcoat is again supplied, and in the right way, that is to say, with other stones than those I've just sucked. These other stones I then begin to suck, one after the other, and to transfer as I go along to the left pocket of my greatcoat, being absolutely certain, as far as one can be in an affair of this kind, that I'm not sucking the same stones as a moment before, but others, And when the right pocket of my greatcoat is again empty of stones, and the 5 I've just sucked are all without exception in the left pocket of my greatcoat, then I proceed to the same redistribution as a moment before, or a similar redistribution. That is to say, I transfer to the right pocket of my greatcoat, now again available, the 5 stones in the right pocket of my trousers, which I replace by the 6 stones in the left pocket of my trousers, which I replace by the 5 stones in the left pocket of my greatcoat. And there I am, ready to begin again. Huh? Do I have to go on? No, for it's clear that after the next series of sucks and transfers, I shall be back where I started. That is to say, with the first 6 stones back in the supply pocket, the next 5 in the right pocket of me stinking old trousers, and finally the last 5 in the left pocket the same, and me 16 stones will have been sucked once, at least, in impeccable succession. Not one sucked twice, not one left unsucked. Oh, it's true that the next time I could scarcely hope to suck me stones in the same order as the first time, and that the first, 7th and 12th, for example, the first cycle might very well be the 6th, 11th and 16th, respectively, of the second, if the worst came to the worst. But that was a drawback I could not avoid. And if in the cycles taken together utter confusion was bound to reign, at least within each cycle taken separately, I could be easy in my mind, at least as easy as one can be in a proceeding of this kind. For in order for each cycle to be identical as to the succession of stones in my mouth, and God knows I'd set me heart on it, the only means were numbered stones or 16 pockets. And rather than make 12 more pockets or number me stones, I prefer to make the best of the comparative peace of mind I enjoyed within each cycle, taken separately. For it was not enough to number the stones, but I would have had to remember, every time I put a stone in my mouth, the number I needed and look for it in my pocket, which would have put me off stone forever in a very short time. For I would never have been sure of not making a mistake, unless, of course, I kept a kind of register in which to tick off the stones one by one as I sucked them, and of this I believed myself incapable. No, the only perfect solution would have been the 16 pockets symmetrically disposed, each one with its stone. Then I would have needed neither to number nor to think, but merely as I sucked a given stone to move on the 15 others, each to the next pocket, a delicate business admittedly, but within me power, and to call always on the same pocket when I felt like a suck. This would have freed me from all anxiety, not only within each cycle taken separately, but also for the sum of all cycles, though they went on forever. But however imperfect my own solution was, I was pleased at having found it all alone. Yes, quite pleased. And if it was perhaps less sound than I'd thought in the first flush of discovery, its inelegance never diminished. And it was above all inelegant in this, to my mind, that the uneven distribution was painful to me, bodily. It's true that a kind of equilibrium was reached at a given moment in the early stages of each cycle, namely after the 3rd suck and before the 4th. But it didn't last long, and the rest of the time I felt the weight of the stones dragging me now to one side, now to the other. So it was something more than a principle I abandoned. When I abandoned the equal distribution, it was a bodily need. But to suck the stones in the way I've described, not haphazard, but with method, was also, I think, a bodily need. Here, then, were 2 incompatible bodily needs at loggerheads. Oh, such things happen. But deep down, I didn't give a tinker's curse about being off me balance, dragged to the right hand and the left, backwards and forwards. And deep down, it was all the same to me whether I sucked a different stone each time or always the same stone until the end of time, for they all tasted exactly the same. And if I had collected 16, it was not in order to ballast myself in such and such a way or to suck them turning about, but simply to have a little store, so as never to be without. But deep down, I didn't give a fiddler's curse about being without. When they were all gone, they'd be all gone. I wouldn't be any the worse off, or hardly any. And the solution to which I rallied in the end was to throw away all the stones but one, which I kept now in one pocket, now in another, which of course I soon lost or threw away or gave away or swallowed. It was a wild part of the coast. I don't remember having been seriously molested. The black speck I was in the great pale stretch of sand, who could wish it harm? Some came near to see what it was, whether it wasn't something of value from a wreck washed up with the storm. And when they saw the Jetson was alive, decently, if wretchedly clothed, they turned away. Old women, and young ones, yes, too, came to gather wood, came and stared in the early days. And they were always the same, and it was in vain I moved from one place to another. In the end, they all knew what I was and kept their distance. I think one of them one day, detaching herself from her companions, came and offered me something to eat, and that I looked at her in silence until she went away. Yes, it seems to me some such incident occurred about this time. But perhaps I'm thinking of another stay at an earlier time. But this'll be me last but one or two. There's never a last by the sea. I feel it's coming. How goes it? Thanks, it's coming. I wanted to be quite sure before I noted it. Scrupulous to the last, finical to a fault, that's Malone all over. I mean, sure of feeling that my hour is at hand. For I never doubted it would come, sooner or later, except the days I felt it was past. For my stories are all in vain. Deep down I never doubted, even the days abounding in proof to the contrary, that I was still alive and breathing in and out the air of earth. At hand. That is, in 2 or 3 days, in the language of the days when they taught me the names of the days, and I marvelled at their being so few, and flourished me little fists, crying out for more, and how to tell the time. What are 2 or 3 days, more or less, in the long run? A joke, but not a word, and on with the losing game. It's good for the health. And all I have to do is go on as though doomed to see the midsummer moon. For I believe I have now reached what is called the month of May. I don't know why. I mean, why I believe that. For May comes from Maya. Hell, I remember that too. Goddess of increase and plenty. Yes, I believe I've entered on the season of increase and plenty. Of increase at last. For plenty comes later with the harvest. So quiet. I'll be still here at All Saints, in the middle of the chrysanthemums. No, this year I shall not hear them howling over their charnels, but this sensation of dilation is hard to resist. All strains towards the nearest deeps, and notably my feet, which even in the ordinary way are so much further from me than all the rest. From my head, I mean, for that is where I'm fled. My feet are leagues away. And to call them in to be cleaned, for example, would, I think, take me over a month, exclusive of the time required to locate them. Strange. I don't feel my feet anymore. My feet feel nothing anymore, and a mercy it is. And yet I feel are beyond the range of the most powerful telescope. Is that what is known as having your foot in the grave? And similarly for the rest. For a mere local phenomenon is something I would not have noticed, having been nothing but a series, or rather a succession of local phenomena, all my life without any result. But my fingers, too, write in other latitudes, and the air that breathes through my pages and turns them without my knowing when I doze off, so that the subject falls far from the verb and the object lands somewhere in the void, is not the air of this second-last abode, and a mercy it is. And perhaps on me hands it's the shimmer of the shadows of leaves and flowers and the brightness of a forgotten sun. Now my sex, I mean the tube itself, and in particular the nozzle, from which, when I was yet a virgin, clouts and gouts of sperm came streaming and splashing up into my face, a continuous flow while it lasted, and which must still drip a little piss from time to time. Otherwise I'd be dead of uremia. I do not expect to see my sex again with my naked eye, not that I'd wish to. We've stared at each other long enough in the eye, but it gives you some idea. But that is not all, and my extremities are not the only parts to recede in their respective directions. Far from it. For me arse, for example, which can hardly be accused of being the end of anything, if my arse suddenly started to shit at the present moment, which God forbid, I firmly believe the lumps would fall out in Australia. And if I were to stand up again, from which God preserve me, I fancy I'd fill a considerable part of the universe. Oh, not more than lying down, but more noticeably. For it's a thing I've often noticed. The best way to pass unnoticed is to lie down flat and not move. And so, there I am, who always thought I would shrivel and shrivel more and more until in the end I could be almost buried in a casket, swelling. No matter. What matters is that in spite of my stories, I continue to fit in this room. Let's call it a room, that's all that matters. And I needn't worry. I'll fit in it as long as needs be. And if I ever succeed in breathing my last, it'll not be in the street or in a hospital, but here, in the midst of my possessions, beside this window that sometimes looks as if it were painted on the wall, like Tiepolo's ceiling at Würzburg. Ooh, what a tourist I must have been. I even remember the diuresis, if it is one. If only I could be sure. Of my deathbed, I mean. And yet, how often have I seen this old head swing out through the door, low, for my big old bones weigh heavy, and the door is low, lower and lower, in my opinion. And each time, it bangs against the jamb, my head does. For I'm tall, and the landing is small, and the man carrying me feet cannot wait before he starts down the stairs for the whole of me to be out, on the landing, I mean. But he has to start turning before that, so as not to bang into the wall of the landing, I mean. So my head bangs against the jamb, it's inevitable. And it doesn't matter to my head in the state it's in. But the man carrying it says, "Hey, Bob, easy." Out of respect, perhaps. But he doesn't know me. He didn't know me, or for fear of hurting his fingers. Bang. Easy. Right. The door. And the room is vacant at last, and ready to receive, after disinfection, for you can't be too careful, a large family, or a pair of turtle doves. Yes, the event is past, but it's too soon to use it, hence the delay. That's what I tell myself. But I tell myself so many things. What truth is there in all this babble? I don't know. I simply believe I can say nothing that is not true. I mean, that has not happened. It's not the same thing, but no matter. Yes, that's what I like about me. At least one of the things that I can say of the Republic, for example. Or Sweetheart, for example. Without having to wonder if I should not rather have cut my tongue out or said something else. Yes, no reflection is needed before or after. I've only to open my mouth for it to testify to the old story, my old story, and to the long silence that has silenced me so that all is silent. And if ever I stop talking, it'll be because there's nothing more to be said, even though all has not been said, even though nothing has been said. But let's leave these morbid matters and get on with that of my demise. In 2 or 3 days, if I remember rightly, then it'll be all over with the Murphys, Merciers, Molloys, Morans, and Malones, unless it goes on beyond the grave. But sufficient unto the day, let us first defunge, and we'll see. How many have I killed? Hitting them on the head or setting fire to them? Offhand, I can only think of 4, all unknowns. I never knew anyone. A sudden wish I have, a sudden wish to see, as sometimes in the old days, something, anything, no matter what, something I could not have imagined. There was the old butler, too, in London, I think. There's London again. I cut his throat with his razor. That makes 5. Seems to me he had a name. Yes, what I need now is a touch of the unimaginable. Coloured for preference. That'll do me good. For this may well be my last journey down the long, familiar galleries with me little suns and moons that I hang aloft, and me pockets full of pebbles standing for men and their seasons. My last, if I'm lucky, then back here to me, whatever that means. And no more leaving me, no more asking me for what I haven't got. Or perhaps we'll all come back, reunited, done with parting, done with prying on one another, back to this foul little den, all dirty, white and vaulted, as though hollowed out of ivory, an old, rotten tooth. Or alone, back alone as when I went. But I doubt it. I can hear them from here, clamouring after me down the corridors, stumbling through the rubble, beseeching me to take them with me. That settles that. I have just time if I've calculated right, and if I calculated wrong, so much the better. I ask nothing better. Besides, I haven't calculated anything. Don't ask anything either. Just time to go and take a little turn, come back here and do all I have to do. I forgot what. Yes, put my possessions in order. And then something else, I forget what. But it'll come back to me when the time comes. But before I go, I should like to find a hole in the wall, behind which so much goes on, such extraordinary things, and often coloured. One last glimpse, and I feel I could slip away as happy as if I were embarking for... I nearly said for Cythera. Decidedly it's time for this to stop. After all, this window is whatever I want it to be up to a point. That's right, don't compromise yourself. What strikes me to begin with is how much rounder it is than it was, so that it looks like a bull's eye or a porthole, no matter, provided there's something on the other side. First, I see the night, which surprises me. Too much surprise, I suppose, because I want to be surprised. Just once more. For in the room it's not night. I know, here it is never really night. I don't care what I said, but often darker than now. Whereas out there, up in the sky, it's black night with few stars, just enough to show that the black night I see is truly of mankind and not merely painted on the window pane, for they tremble like true stars, as they would not do if they were painted. And as if that were not enough to satisfy me, it is the outer world, the other world. Suddenly the window across the way lights up, or suddenly I realize it's lit up. For I am not one of those people who can take in everything at a single glance, but I have to look long and fixedly, and give things time to travel the long road that lies between me and them. And that, indeed, is a happy chance, and augurs well, unless it be devised on purpose to make mock of me, for I might have found nothing better to speed me from this place than the nocturnal sky, where nothing happens, though it's full of tumult and violence. Nothing, unless you have the whole night before you to follow the slow fall and rise of other worlds, when there are any, or watch out for the meteors, and I've not the whole night before me. And it does not matter to me whether they have risen before dawn and not yet gone to bed, or risen in the middle of the night intending perhaps to go back to bed when they've finished. And it's enough for me to see them standing up against each other behind the curtain, which is dark, so that it's a dark light, if one may say so, and dim the shadow they cast, where they cleave so fast together that they seem a single body, and consequently a single shadow. But when they totter, it's clear that they're twain, and in vain they clasp with the energy of despair. It's clear we have here two distinct and separate bodies, each enclosed within its own frontiers, and having no need of each other to come and go and sustain the flame of life. For each is well able to do so, independently of the other. Perhaps they're cold, that they rub against each other so, for friction maintains heat and brings it back when it's gone. It's all very pretty and strange, this big, complicated shape made up of more than one, for perhaps there are three of them, and how it sways and totters, but rather poor in colour. But the night must be warm, for of a sudden the curtain lifts on a flare of tender colour, pale blush and white of flesh, then pink that must have come from a garment, and gold, too, that I haven't time to understand. So it's not cold they are, standing so lightly clad by the open window. Ah, how stupid I am. I see what it is. They must be loving each other. That must be how it's done. Good. That's done me good. I'll see now if the sky is still there. Then go. They're right up against the curtain now, motionless. Is it possible they've finished already? They've loved each other standing like dogs. Soon they'll be able to part, or perhaps they're just having a breather before they tackle the tit-bit. Back and forth, that must be wonderful. They seem to be in pain. Enough. Goodbye. But at the period I refer to now, this active life is at an end. I do not move and never shall again unless it be under the impulsion of a third party. For of the great traveller I had been, on my hands and knees in the later stages, then crawling on my belly or rolling on the ground, only the trunk remains, in sorry trim, surmounted by the head, with which we're already familiar. This is the part of myself, the description of which I've best assimilated and retained, stuck like a sheaf of flowers in a deep jar, its neck flush with my mouth. On the side of a quiet street near the shambles, I'm at rest at last. If I turn, I shall not say my head, but my eyes, free to roll as they list. I can see the statue of the Apostle of Horses Meat, a bust. His pupilless eyes of stone are fixed upon me. That makes four, with those of my Creator, omnipresent. Do not imagine I flatter myself. I'm privileged, though not exactly in order. I'm tolerated by the police. They know I'm speechless and consequently incapable of taking unfair advantage of my situation to stir up the population against its governors by means of burning oratory during the rush hour or subversive slogans whispered after nightfall to belated pedestrians the worse for drink. And since I've lost all my members, with the exception of the one-time virile, they know also that I shall not be guilty of any gestures liable to be construed as inciting to arms, a prisonable offence. The fact is, I trouble no one, except possibly that category of hypersensitive persons for whom the least thing is an occasion for scandal and indignation. But even here the risk is negligible, such people avoiding the neighbourhood for fear of being overcome at the sight of the cattle, fat and fresh from the pastures, trooping towards the humane killer. From this point of view, the spot is well chosen, from my point of view, and even those sufficiently unhinged to be affected by the spectacle I offer, I mean upset and temporarily diminished in their capacity for work and aptitude for happiness, need only look at me a second time, those who can bring themselves to do it, to have immediately their minds made easy. For my face reflects nothing but the satisfaction of one savouring a well-earned rest. It's true, my mouth was hidden most of the time, and my eyes closed. Ah, yes, sometimes it's in the past, sometimes in the present. And alone, perhaps, the state of my skull covered with pustules and blue bottles. These latter are naturally abounding in such a neighbourhood, preserved me from being an object of envy for many and a source of discontent. I hope this gives a fair picture of my situation. Once a week I was taken out of my receptacle so that it might be emptied. This duty fell to the proprietress of the chop house across the street, and she performed it punctually and without complaint, beyond an occasional good-natured reflection to the effect that I was a nasty old pig, for she had a kitchen garden. Without, perhaps, having exactly won her heart, it was clear I didn't leave her indifferent. And before putting me back, she took advantage of the circumstances that my mouth was accessible to stick into it a chunk of lights or a marrowbone. And when snow fell, she covered me with a tarpaulin, still watertight in places. It was under its shelter, snug and dry, that I became acquainted with the boon of tears, while wondering to what I was indebted for it, not feeling moved. And this not merely once, but every time she covered me, that is to say, twice or three times a year. Yes, it was fatal. No sooner had the tarpaulin settled over me and the precipitous steps of my benefactress died away than the tears began to flow. Was this to be interpreted as an effect of gratitude? But in that case, shouldn't I have felt grateful? Besides, I realized darkly that if she took care of me thus, it was not solely out of goodness, or else I'd not rightly understood the meaning of goodness when it was explained to me. It must not be forgotten that I represented for this woman an undeniable asset. For quite apart from the services I rendered to her lettuce, I constituted for her establishment a kind of landmark, not to say an advertisement far more effective than, for example, a chef in cardboard, pot-bellied in profile and full face, wafer thin. That she was well aware of this is shown by the trouble she'd taken to festoon my jar with Chinese lanterns, of a very pretty effect in the twilight, and fortiori in the night. And the jar itself, so that the passer-by might consult with greater ease the menu attached to it, had been raised on a pedestal at her own expense. It's thus I learned that our turnips and gravy are not so good as they used to be, but that on the other hand, our carrots, equally in gravy, are even better than formerly. The gravy is not varied. This is the kind of language I can almost understand. These the kind of clear and simple notions on which it's possible for me to build. I ask for no other spiritual nourishment. A turnip, I know roughly what a turnip is like. A carrot too, particularly the flaky or Colmar red. I seem to grasp at certain moments the nuance that divides bad from worse. And if I do not always feel the full force of yesterday and today, this does not detract very much from the satisfaction I feel at having penetrated the gist of the matter. Of her salad, for example, I never heard anything but praise. Yes, I represent for her a tidy little capital, and if I should ever happen to die, I'm convinced she'd be genuinely annoyed. This should help me to live. I like to fancy that when the fatal hour of reckoning comes, if it ever does, and my debt to nature is paid off at last, she'll do her best to prevent the removal from where it now stands of the old vase in which I shall have accomplished my vicissitudes, and perhaps in the place now occupied by me head she'll set a melon, or a vegetable marrow, or a big pineapple with his little tuft, or better still, I don't know why, a Swede in memory of me. Then I shall not vanish quite, as is so often the way with people when buried. But it's not to speak of her that I've started lying again. De nobis ipsi silemis, Decidedly, that should have been my motto. Yes, they gave me some lessons in pigsty Latin too. It looks well, sprinkled through the perjury. It's perhaps worth noting that snow alone, provided of course it's heavy, entitles me to the tarpaulin. No other form of filthy weather lets loose in her the maternal instinct in my favour. I've tried to make her understand, dashing me head angrily against the neck of the jar, that I should like to be shrouded more often. At the same time, I let me spittle flow over in an attempt to show me displeasure. In vain. I wonder what explanation she can have found to account for this behaviour. She must have talked it over with her husband, and probably been told that I was merely stifling. That's just the reverse of the truth. But credit where credit is due. We made a bolt of it between us, I with me signs and she with her reading of them. This story is no good. I'm beginning almost to believe it. But let's see how it's supposed to end. That'll sober me. The trouble is I forget how it goes on. Not so long ago, with a kind of shrink of me head and shoulders, as when one is scolded, I could disappear. Soon, at my present rate of decrease, I may spare myself this effort, and spare myself the trouble of closing my eyes so as not to see the day, for they're blinded by the jar a few inches away. Wrong again. This effort and this trouble will not be spared me, for the woman, displeased at seeing me sink lower and lower, has raised me up by filling the bottom of my jar with sawdust, which she changes every week when she makes me toilet. It's softer than the stone, but less hygienic, and I had got used to the stone. Now I'm getting used to the sawdust. It's an occupation. I could never bear to be idle. It saps one's energy. And I open and close my eyes, open and close, as in the past, and I move me head in and out as heretofore. And often at dawn, having left it out all night, I bring it in to mock the woman and lead her astray. For in the morning, when she's rattled up her shutters, the first look of her eyes, still moist with fornication, is for the jar. And when she doesn't see me head, she comes running to find out what has happened. For either I've escaped during the night or else I've shrunk again. But just before she reaches me, I up with it like a jack-in-the-box, the old eyes glaring up at her. But my little game, which I should have thought inoffensive, has cost me dear. Yet I could have sworn I was insolvable. It's true, one doesn't know one's riches until they're lost, and I probably have others still that only await the thief to be brought to me notice. And today, if I can still open and close my eyes as in the past, I can no longer, because of me roguish character, move me head in and out, as in the good old days. For a collar, fixed to the mouth of the jar, now encircles me neck, just below the chin, and me lips, which used to be hidden and which are sometimes pressed against the freshness of the stone, can now be seen be all and sundry. Did I say I catch flies? I snap them up. Clack. Does this mean I still have me teeth? To have lost one's limbs and preserved one's dentition, what a mockery. There's really only one thing that worries me, and that's the prospect of being throttled, if I should ever happen to shorten further. Asphyxia. I, who was always the respiratory type, witnessed this thorax still mine, together with the abdomen. I, who murmured each time I breathed in, here comes more oxygen, and each time I breathed out, there go the impurities. The blood is bright red again, the blue face, the obscene protrusion of the tongue, the tumefaction of the penis. The penis, well now, that's a nice surprise. I'd forgotten I had one. What a pity I've no arms. There might still be something to be wrung from it. No, 'tis better thus. At my age, to start mansturbating again, it'd be indecent and fruitless. And yet one can never tell. With a yo-heave-ho, concentrating with all my might on a horse's rump, at the moment when the tail rises, who knows, I might not go altogether empty-handed away. Haven't I almost felt it flutter? Does this mean they didn't get me? I could have sworn they get me. But perhaps I'm getting mixed up with other scrota. Not another stir out of it, in any case. I'll concentrate again. A Clydesdale. A Suffolk stallion. Come, a little cooperation, please. Finish dying. It's the least you might do after all the trouble they've taken to bring you to life. The worst is over. You've been sufficiently assassinated, sufficiently suicided to be able to stand now on your own feet, like a big boy. That's what I keep telling myself. And I add, quite carried away, slough off this mortal inertia. It's out of place in this society. They can't do everything. They put you on the right road, led you with a hand to the very brink of the precipice. Now it's up to you, with an unassisted last step to show them your gratitude. I like this colourful language, these bold metaphors and apostrophes. Through the splendours of nature they dragged a paralytic, and now there's nothing more to admire. It's me duty to jump, that it may be said, there goes another who has lived. All these Murphys, Molloys, and Malones do not fool me. They've made me waste my time, suffer for nothing. Speak of them, when in order to stop speaking, I should have spoken of me and of me alone. But I just said I've spoken of me, am speaking of me. I don't care a curse what I just said. It's now I shall speak of me for the first time. I thought I was right in enlisting these sufferers of my pains. I was wrong. They never suffered my pains. Their pains are nothing compared to mine, a mere tittle of mine. The tittle I thought I could put from me in order to witness it. Let them be gone now, them and all the others, those I've used and those I've not used. Give me back the pains I lent them and vanish from my life, my memory, my terrors and shames. There. Now there's no one here but me. No one wheels about me. No one comes towards me. No one has ever met anyone before my eyes. These creatures have never been. Only I and this black void have ever been. And the sounds? No, all is silent. And the lights, on which I'd set such store, must they go out too? Yes. Out with them, there's no light here. No grey either. Black is what I should have said. Nothing then but me, of which I know nothing, except that I have never uttered. And this black, of which I know nothing either, except that it is black and empty. That then is what, since I have to speak, I shall speak of, until I need speak no more.